So first of all, I'd like to bid you all a very warm welcome to this webinar this evening, when we're going to look at the transition from core surgical training to the very exciting period of specialty training as you develop your careers. I've got two colleagues with me and I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. But firstly, my name is Richard Kerr. I've been a consultant neurosurgeon in Oxford for the last 30 years. I've been on the RCS Council here for 6 years, and I've also recently led a commission looking at the future of surgery. And obviously there are aspects within that about training and how we train the surgeons of the future. Nadine.
Hi, good evening everyone, or good late afternoon. Thank you all for joining. My name is Nadine Hachach-Haram. I'm a plastic surgery trainee on the Pan-Thames rotation in London. And I've also had the honor of working with Richard and Dion on the Commission of the Future of Surgery. I'm also a member of the BAPRAS Innovation and Royal Society of Medicine groups looking at innovation for surgical training. And I'm also a clinical innovator and entrepreneur myself, and have my own startup. So I hopefully will be able to talk to you today about what the journey for surgical trainees is like, and also how we can develop portfolio careers alongside that.
Thank you. Dion?
I'm Dion Morton. I'm a colorectal surgeon, have been practicing for more years than I care to remember. But I'm also a professor of surgery at Birmingham University. And so I think I can hopefully bring a perspective around academic careers and also the perspective of a trainer.
Great, Richard. Fantastic. Thank you very much. So welcome to you all. I hope you find this interesting, and we look forward to your participation through questions and also comments back to the college afterwards about other issues or changes that we can make to this format. The aim of this is really to develop issues around this transition in your lives from those of core training into specialty training. Now, I am going to briefly outline the process and just draw your attention to various websites that will hopefully give you more information. But the aim of this is really just to develop ideas around that process, about the challenges and the potential pitfalls that are associated with this change as your career develops. The session is aimed to assist you through this period of change. And we therefore want you, as I've said, to ask questions and give us thoughts about this transition process. So if we just move on to aspects of this process, I'd first of all just draw attention to the JCST website, the Joint Committee on Surgical Training, which outlines very carefully the process by which core surgical trainees go through the system to enable them to be in a position to apply for specialty training. This website details the duration of that. It details the need to engage with the intercollegiate surgical curriculum program, and it also gives you information about the specialty training website, so you can identify the person specifications that are appropriate for each of the various disciplines that you may well go on to. It then reminds you that unfortunately there is an exam that would be expected to be completed at the end of your core surgical training before you move into your specialty training at ST3 level. Staying with the JCST website, there is then a section that looks specifically for the requirements through specialty training, the need to continue to use the ISCP website, but also to develop your e-logbook, which hopefully you will have already started by that point. Now, it draws reference to something called the Gold Guide, and this is really the Bible of training. It's a downloadable version, obviously, that you can look at, but I would encourage you to look at that very carefully, and it does give you an enormous amount of information about the training process and the various steps that you need to go through. If you come to the College of Surgeons website, you will see that a lot of this information is there as well in terms of the entry requirements and the training requirements. If you look under the careers in surgery part of the website, it will then detail again for you the issues of core surgical training, and it will detail the requirements for specialty training as well. and there are various subsections to this which you can go out to get more information. It'll also point you to the hopefully some helpful information about your specialty training program. For example, here you can see the various subsections in the curriculum, issues around flexible training, issues around out of program, a section particularly for women in surgery, and including there is a section on the various courses that hopefully you will find helpful that are provided by the college. Now, if you look at those courses, they're broken down into the various levels of training. From here, med students, foundation trainees, core trainees, and so on. And you can then go into each one of those and identify courses that may be appropriate for your level of training. I'd also draw your attention to a couple of other websites. The next one is the Health Education England website, HEE website, and that too has some very useful information about the training program, and in fact has detailed a real life story here of Damiano Baroni, who's in fact a neurosurgical trainee, but it gives an insight in terms of his life in a surgical training program. So before I ask Nadine just to begin her thoughts on her career, I just mention a couple of other websites which I think are appropriate. First is the GMC website. Obviously, they are the regulatory body, and there is a lot of information on that website as well, not only about the pathway from core through to specialty training, but also the alternative pathways using the CSER route of training. And I also draw attention to the COPMED website, COPMED. That too will give you quite a lot of helpful information. So that just sets a basis. But as I said, I don't want to focus on that part of this. What I really want to focus on is what I hope will give you the added value of speaking to those who have either been through this or are intimately involved with it as a trainer. So Nadine, over to you.
Thank you very much.
There's the clicker.
Thank you. And thanks again for those joining. And for those who are core trainees on the call, it wasn't that long ago that I was a core surgical trainee myself. And I think it's quite an exciting time in training because it's a time for you to explore different specialties and really hone in on which area you are most interested in. But for the rest of the talk today, for my part, I'd like to share with you my experience of transition into surgical training, my personal journey, and I'll share some personal stories from my family as well, how I found making progress through that, and also some of the action points about where there are areas of improvement, but also we can talk about how we may be able to do that as opposed to what we need to do to change. I put this up not to share a CV, but really to hopefully share with you my personal journey through a snapshot of pictures and some headlines, but also to share with you the opportunity here that you don't just have to be a surgical trainee that's just focused on one specialty. You can have multiple interests around that, and that has been very well supported throughout my training. So as I told you earlier, I'm a plastic surgery trainee, but I have had the opportunity to get involved in innovation and to learn from cross-industry, from private sector, from the tech sector. And so I have a lot of involvement in innovation. I had the opportunity with that to speak at TED and to get involved in exponential medicine as a concept in the US, but also feed that into my academic excitement around innovation. What does innovation look like, and what is it going to look like in the next few years? And part of that work we did on the Future of Surgery Commission. Oops, next slide.
Slides are given up.
Slides given up. 1 second. I'll just move
to
the next slide.
There we go.
So just as a brief background for those, so you're aware of where I'm sitting at the moment, and many of you may have had a similar journey or somewhat similar. I started my undergraduate training in the United States, and I moved here and continued my undergraduate training in pre-medicine and biochemistry. So I had a BSc in biochemistry and then had the opportunity to apply to the graduate entry program. And there may be some of you on the call who are thinking about it or looking at the graduate entry program. That's a great program for those that have had another career in the past or looked at biomedical sciences or engineering as a first degree and actually figured that their passion was really around medicine. And I had the opportunity to do that and then go through my training, FY1 and FY2 in London, core surgical training 1 and 2 in London, And then I got onto specialty training initially in Cambridge, and then because my family was mostly situated in London, I was able to transfer back into the London Deanery, and finally able to complete with my exam. And at the bottom of that, I just wanted to show some sort of life milestones for me as well, because I was able to have those in parallel. I never took time out of training, and I didn't go into less than full-time training, although these are all very well supported within the system, and we'll talk about that later. But I was able to have my children, and I was able to also marry that up with my passion for innovation. So I hope that kind of, you know, reassures some people that have anxiety. I often have students coming up to me feeling really anxious about being able to do both. You can do both. I think what's also important is that the deaneries are generally supportive and understand that sometimes with family it may be difficult to move across the country, and there are avenues around sort of reapplying to deaneries that are more suitable to your family. I won't focus too much on that, but that is something just for you to be aware of. There is some flexibility around that. And so the areas and sort of what are the drivers for us as trainees are, you know, the training and its requirements. We all have, you know, an e-logbook or work-based assessments that we have to complete our training. But at the same time, we have to deliver service to our hospitals in the form of extra clinics or extra lists that may not necessarily be deemed as training opportunities, but are important to maintain the service of the department. And then, of course, we all have our personal circumstances and support networks around that. And so those are things that we're always feeding into my journey at whatever stage that is. And I suspect will be the same for most people. And so if I look back at that training, I can say that there's definitely been progress that has been made in that process. Definitely the hours are more amenable to the opportunity to have more of a portfolio career. You can also look at ways of taking time out and coming back to training, taking less than full-time training and marrying up a career alongside an interest in consulting or research or management or MBA or what have you. The path is clearer once you get onto it for a numbered trainee, where you go from foundation to core training to surgical training, and there are sort of checkpoints at every moment where you have to have interviews to go through that and selection processes. And for those that aren't successful in getting on that pathway, there are alternative routes like the Caesar route and others. So it's not sort of doomsday if you don't get a national training number. There are also more national TIG training programs, so fellowships that are nationally recognized that all trainees around the country can apply to. For example, there is a cleft TIG fellowship, or there's a skin cancer TIG fellowship, and it's not specialty specific. You can have a trainee in maxillofacial surgery or plastic surgery or ENT surgery all applying for the same fellowship. So it makes it more accessible to the wider community. And of course, we've talked a bit about flexible training at the end, but I think bullying is just an important comment. I'd rather sort of bring that forward now, because there's no doubt that there may have been throughout the journey of training and its evolution over many, many years, some elements of bullying. But the college and a number of many organizations in the country are definitely looking closely at putting frameworks around that. And the college has published strong frameworks around bullying. And so it's very important that you feel supported and feel able to speak up when needed. And these are just some of those, the hammer it out. I think the Orthopedic Association have been very powerful. Simon Fleming and others in his team have done some great work around that with hammer it out. Again, there have also been reports, Ms McNally has also spoken extensively on that as well from the college. And I think what's also interesting is the college embracing innovation and spending, and I would say, you know, all of us who are on that commission, a lot of time and many, many hours were put into this commission to try and really explore, you know, every corner of the earth in terms of what innovations were happening out there and how those can impact surgery. And so this is a really great report. For those who haven't read it, I would really urge you to go to the website and read it. And the website is also very interactive and gives you opportunities to look at case stories around it. And when we talk about flexible training, that has also been a great progress. I know in my own department, there are 5 trainees that are less than full-time, extremely well supported, and the rotas are all fixed to work around them. So they have opportunities to be at home with their children whilst also being at work and getting the full extent of the training that they need. And there's no, they're not treated any differently. And I would say that you know, they're getting the same level of treatment that other trainees that are full-time are getting. And you can see just from the search, you know, what an important subject it is and how many searches came up so quickly. But of course, nothing is perfect. And I don't think any of us sitting here would say they are. Would you agree? I mean, yeah,
absolutely.
It is. And there are definitely areas that we can improve. And from a training point of view, I can share some areas, but I'm sure Dion will also be talking about some of those areas as well. But definitely, you know, training is expensive. Courses, getting through interview courses, requirement courses, that continues to be expensive. And we have to look at ways to try and make that more cost effective for trainees and more kind of subsidized. It is to some extent overly interview driven, where you start to morph into very much of a kind of target checkbox approach, where it doesn't really, sometimes it's very hard to delineate what experience people have. They've just been so well trained to interview that they're just focused on the interview. And then what tends to happen is that people's training is purely focused on what they need to do to get to the next interview stage. And I think that makes it to some extent a bit impersonal and really turns into the sort of lowest common denominator approach, where you're just trying to get through that stage and you're not thinking about the surgery, about the patients, just thinking about sort of getting through to the interview. On the flip side of that, though, the reason these interviews were brought in was to rule out nepotism and to increase objectivity. So it is a balance, and it is important to have some means of objectively selecting people, but there's definitely more work that can be done around that to make it slightly more personal and not very much a one-size-fits-all. I think the final point I talked about earlier, that it is difficult to move around when you have families, but the deaneries are becoming more receptive to that and understand that whilst national selection is national and you could be sent anywhere at any moment based on where you get your number, they are looking at ways to try and make this more amenable to people with families. And finally, I'll try and not take too long, but it's important to put value back into the surgical community. So we're thinking about, you know, how can we try and improve some of these areas? And when we think about the modern surgeon, this is from Professor Derek Alderson, the president of the college, and was involved, you know, oversaw basically the future of surgery as the president, is that the modern surgeon will not only have to develop appropriate clinical skills, but can expect to be an educator, a researcher, and a leader of a multidisciplinary, multi-professional team. And it's something that we talked a lot about on the commission, that we have to be cross-specialty, I would say even kind of not even just doctors, but nurses, a multidisciplinary team working together. And we have to be multilingualists. We have to be able to understand the areas of, you know, radiotherapy, genomics, genetics, and all the other components that feed into a patient's journey. And so one of the ways where we may be looking at doing this is around mentoring. And the college has published a report in 2015 on, you know, mentoring and coaching. We do have, you know, reduced access to training in some areas. We do still have lack of the appropriate number of surgeons we may need to deliver a service around the country that's enough and of the highest quality. So we need to look at ways to engage the community and make surgeons stay and engage in, you know, signing up for surgery as a career and choose that path. And so coaching and mentoring is something that, you know, we should definitely be doing more about and looking at how we can implement that into more mainstream practice. And also, as we talked a lot about the Commission for the Future of Surgery, there's no doubt we need to look at embracing innovation. It doesn't necessarily mean something very technological or gadgety, but actually just innovation and process and pathways and patient journeys, and looking at how we can take some of those pathways that we're looking and accelerate them into our surgical practice by working with the college alongside it. And we could look at either dragon dance style competitions or drawing multidisciplinary teams around matching some of these technologies with the areas that they are needed. And these are just some of my personal opinions on how we can try and address some of these. And finally, it's on enriching the values and engagement of the surgical community. The Royal College is a great institution. It's been around for a long time, and is really that kind of gold standard, you know, we go to for information, for accreditation, and we need to continue to work hard to connect all the members of the college, all the members of the wider ecosystem, and look at how we can better understand the surgical team beyond just the surgeon. And of course, finally, if I can do, you know, all of this and get involved in training and have a family and look at innovation, then many of you can do that too. So beyond today, if any of you feel the need or desire to reach out to me, you're more than welcome to.
Nadine, thanks for that. So before we move on, Dion, I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions.
Go for it.
So you've described a pathway. What was the hardest part of that transition when you've gone from a core trainee into your specialty, your chosen specialty area? What was the hardest part of that? And as a second question, what would you have done differently in that?
Two very good questions. I think it's very, you know, as a core surgical trainee, to some extent you feel a bit protected as an SHO. You are invited to engage and be involved in the care of patients. You look after them, you know, you're on calls, but you're very, very well supported. And then as you become a registrar, it's a big step up going from an SHO to a registrar. And suddenly you have much more responsibility, and the learning curve is steep. You need to really kind of accelerate your learning to make sure that you can deliver a safe on-call, to be a safe pair of hands and support to your consultant during cases, and to be thinking in two minds. One, all the things I need to get done to get my training complete, whilst also trying to really take time to absorb and learn all those things you're trying to do, and to do it enough times that you feel safe and competent to eventually do it on your own. So I think trying to go through that, I would say that kind of my first 3 or 4 months as an ST3 were probably challenging, because I was trying to really step up, learn, and do everything all in one go. And I think those are often challenging, and that's where I feel having a mentor or coach is helpful. And I think what got me through that was, it just so happened that the department, there was a senior registrar who was incredibly supportive as a mentor, and he said, look, I know it's your first few months, and it's difficult, you know, these are always scary. The first few on calls as a reg, you're always a bit kind of nervous. He said, you know, you've got my number, anything you need, just call me. And just knowing that there was another person there. And that happened.
Did he offer that to you, or did you go and say to him, look, you know, I'm new here?
He offered it to me, and I think, and it was informal, but perhaps having, you know, that may not be the experience of many trainees as they step up. So I think having that type of mentoring or buddy approach to kind of new incoming registrars may be something very helpful.
So identifying someone slightly more experienced in the department who's recently gone through a similar phase.
Who's not, and something now I do, because I know that
Absolutely.
really helped me.
So it's almost like a senior buddy system rather than mentoring.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting.
Phone a friend, isn't it?
Mentorship has become a big part of academic training because of the perceived pressures and the challenges that people are facing. But it hasn't been embraced so much in NHS surgical training, and I just wonder if we're missing a trick there, Richard. What's the college view on this?
I think the college is very much supportive of a mentoring process, and in fact, if you look at the requirements in the job descriptions, it actually says very clearly that there should be a mentor appointed for every new consultant post,
but also for trainees.
But there needs to be down to trainees as well.
Because I think at the ST3 level, and I think the two kind of the big jumps and hurdles where responsibility significantly increases is at the ST3 level, and then your first day as a junior consultant. I think these are two critical points where you could be buddied with, you know, a consultant that's, you know, been around for 5 years, or, you know, he's just been through that journey, but not far. I think that is a great, especially with your first few difficult cases, it's always great to just have that phone a friend, that buddy who's going to be there. And for me, for my first few on calls, you know, I had a few really difficult cases. You know, he came in, he said, look, we can do it together, it's fine. Just having that extra support made a big difference. And I think it doesn't mean that you're not good enough. You shouldn't feel shy or embarrassed to ask for help. I think it actually shows insight, because it means that you recognize the level you're at and willing to bring help then and kind of and go through that early on.
I'd go further than that. I think it's absolutely crucial, actually, that you feel able to enlist support from colleagues around you, and it means absolutely nothing. You know, it doesn't belittle you at all. Dion, let's have some of your thoughts.
Delighted, and thank you for inviting me along. Clearly, the value of the surgical trainer, in my opinions, aren't as important as that of the trainee. This is about a trainee transition. But I think it's fair to say that as a trainer, it impacts on the experience of the trainee, and so perhaps some reflections from me might be valuable. I think what I found as I looked at Nadine's slides and watched her talk through it, there's enormous synergy between our thinking and some remarkable overlap, I think, but I'll try and highlight that. So from my perspective as a trainer, I think the drivers for the trainer are first and foremost clinical governance, and that is essentially safety. And the second is, of course, health service delivery, and that has become a higher driver in the last 5 to 10 years than it was perhaps when I first started out as a consultant. And of course, the central driver is the patient. And I think what I would reflect on there as a trainer is there is no training doesn't actually reach those top 3 parameters. They're not, it's not one of the main drivers. It cannot be in my surgical practice, except for clinical governance. And clinical governance but it's about safety. And safety isn't about excellence. And I think training needs to be focused on excellence rather than just safety. Like Nadine, I think there's been actually remarkable, despite these really what are conflicting pressures coming from different areas, there has been remarkable progress in the area of surgical training. And I just highlighted a few here, some of which Nadine has actually already mentioned. I mean, certainly the centralized process with clear governance has given real objectivity to the appointments, to the career progression, and it has provided a streamlined pathway that just simply wasn't there when I started out as a surgical trainee. And people would get moved to a hospital and literally would disappear from the training scheme. And that just cannot happen now. And that's a much better thing. And to be honest, the real thing was removing nepotism and removing the inappropriate power of the trainer over the career progression of the individual. I think the second area that again has been touched on is the increased flexibility, and I think that's fantastic. And I think bringing diversity into surgical practice is absolutely of paramount importance, and flexibility is completely necessary to deliver that. And that flexibility means actually that all of us as trainees have the opportunity to develop ourselves in different ways, and I think that is incredibly important. On a personal level, I can see that there's been a huge advance in academic careers and how they are integrated. You now have parallel structures for NHS and academic training, and I have trainees who literally jump between the two, and that is entirely healthy. And you can cross from one side of the track to the other side of the track and back again, as fits that particular part of your training or how you're enjoying different aspects of your training.
And at any time point in your training as well.
Absolutely. I get approached by medical students, house officers, core trainees, SPRs about moving into academic training, and it can be done at different stages of career. And I think importantly, stages that suit the individual. And I think that it's not a one size fits all, Richard. We need to be more accommodating in what we can provide. Diversity also benefits the patient. It means we're bringing different experiences.
But having said that, there are perhaps better times in your career to move into an academic path.
I think it depends on what you really want from that. So an academic training has a value of its own. It gives you a diversity of skills and a breadth to what you can bring to the table, and it does teach you to take managerial responsibility. And so there's no doubt that the academic trainees can move into senior NHS management much more easily and contribute in different ways. I think you're alluding to someone who really wants to focus on primarily an academic career long term. And I think it's fair to say I would do that earlier if I could, if I was confident about my decision making. But again, the pathways don't make it an absolute requirement, because you can move quite smoothly between them. But generally, earlier means you have more time to develop your academic career, so that gives you more flexibility in terms of your growth, and means you're up to speed when you become a senior lecturer.
And I think that's an important point if you are pursuing a predominantly academic pathway.
Yes, I think it is. But there is room in the present system for all comers. And we have recent appointments in Birmingham who came from NHS backgrounds into academic careers very late in their career, and have still managed to reach professorial level appointments in university without difficulty. So it can be done. I think it's interesting, in the UK we have a rotation system, so you have a very wide experience. That's always been the case, and I think that's a real strength of our training system. And like Nadine, I think that the reduced hours really give the opportunity for trainees nowadays to develop in a way that we really didn't have that opportunity quite open to us, Richard, because we were working some very long hours at the time. I'm not trying to whitewash and pretend that everything's roses. I don't think that's the case. And like Nadine, I think there are real challenges. I think the impersonal nature of surgical training is something that we've failed to overcome as yet. And I think the numbers of consultants, the size of teams, and the reduced hours means it is much more impersonal. And I think as a trainee, we really valued being part of a team. And actually being part of a team is very much surgical practice. I think it's something we might come back to. I think the current training system is not expertise driven. Nadine referred to it as tick box. I think it's target driven and it's safety driven. It's almost the lowest common denominator, not a striving for excellence. And I think that that is understandable in a centralized process, but it's not ideal. And I would add, actually, there is a focus on surgical skills and technique, which is, I think older surgeons such as Richard, I'm thinking of, Richard and myself, we think that the best surgeons are complete doctors who talk to their patients, who can explain the risks and benefits and understand the journey. And I was listening earlier to one of Nadine's points where she was looking at the expertise across all the different disciplines. In a way, surgery is a multidisciplinary. We are a melting pot for all the different medical specialties that might be impacting on our patients. And having a breadth of understanding, I think, is vital. And our training scheme doesn't focus on that. And that's something I think everyone recognises we need to do more. And the final is there is no focus on personal development. I think Nadine alluded to it in terms of it. You're not really being marked on the added value you can bring to the table. You're being marked on ticking the box. Yeah. And I think that that is the reality. And I think that it can feel a bit like a conveyor belt because it's a tick box exercise that you're going in. But I think that that is a mistake conceptually. And I think actually it is the opportunity of every trainee to take advantage of the ways they can develop themselves and grow their experience. It is not going to be the responsibility of the training scheme to do that. And that may be wrong, but in the present system, it's not there. So I think the opportunities are there, the tools are there, but it is up to the individual to take up that opportunity. So instead of thinking of the negatives around surgical training, and there are real negatives, there's no doubt about that. The positives are it is a fantastic and unique opportunity to develop yourself in a whole way, and the flexibility in training allows you to do lots of different things, and Nadine has alluded to more than I could imagine. So I have mentioned personal development. I think it's hugely important. I think I ask my trainees to take ownership of their training. It's not the ownership of the trainer, certainly not the trainer, or of the training scheme. It's actually the ownership of the individual. And it's up to us to make the best of our training opportunities. We know that there is a lack of patient focus in our training program, but actually as an individual, we can focus on that and we can say that that is a central part of what I'm delivering. I think that it's helpful. I find it helpful when I counsel trainees, and I do try to act as a mentor, is defining your own goals. And don't just think of goals as long-term goals. I think it's worth considering, what am I trying to achieve today? What am I trying to achieve in this procedure? What am I trying to learn from my activities over the next months? What is my goal for this training period of 1 year? And in setting those goals, they make these targets more realizable, and it makes the experience more enjoyable. I was trying to think of a parallel. In tennis, we are taught that we should try and plan our next shot. And I think sometimes in surgical training, we are literally just hitting the ball back and we're not planning our next shot. And I think in training, if we planned it, we actually would get more out of it. And finally, there's a great focus on the breadth, on specialization, and understandably so, because specialization means expertise. But actually, as a patient, I also like to see breadth in my surgeons. And I like to know that they can deal with a wide range of different problems and issues that I might bring to them. And funny enough, it's the breadth in your training that often adds value to you as a consultant or as a manager or as a teacher later in your clinical career. So sometimes people worry too much about staying focused on a single direction, on a single goal, and actually having a breadth to your goals and a breadth to your vision, I think can add value to you as a professional and probably as an individual.
The adding value, I think, is fascinating, because there is a feeling that actually the diversity of our career portfolio is not valued by those around us. So you need to have that value for yourself, because those around you may well not value that at all.
I agree. I think that
but that's a failing in the system.
It is definitely, and I
don't allow that.
We've said quite clearly the system is not perfect.
Yeah,
we need to be careful, because I need to be clear. Some of this is our own personal views. It's not necessarily everyone's views. But I would say there has been an over focus on specialisation. I understand why that is. But actually, in life, the pendulum often swings, Richard. And I think we will see a focus moving more towards the breadth of what you can bring, and more the greater diversity to your experience that will benefit patients. And I think that will come into the training scheme, and I think it will come into the assessments, I'm afraid, and that's what will drive the change.
But it's, I mean, if we think back to but if we think back to the Commission and the work of the Commission, it was very much identified in that we do need to have a much more portfolio career with different aspects of our career, and that those aspects bring value in the end to the treatment of patients, which is what it's all about. So if everybody is a coalface surgeon, and we don't get involved with teaching and training and innovating and researching and mentoring, then actually there isn't the progression that we want there to be for the benefit of the patients in the long run. And yet we've got to bring value into that somehow. And that to me is a difficult point. How do you make that of value when we're measured on that tick box exercise, or for consultants, you're measured on the number of patients you see in your outpatient clinic or the number of operations you've done? You're not measured on the teaching you've done or the innovation you've done or that aspect of it.
We measure what we can measure, Richard.
I appreciate
that. And that's why surgeons are measured more carefully than other doctors. It's because
it's easy to measure.
Yeah. And so I accept it as a failing, and we know that the system is far too focused on numbers rather than on quality. And we need to find ways to measure quality. I hope, my aspiration is that as we develop the technologies and the augmented reality, so we will start to build these quality assurances into our training programs. But it's hard.
Yeah,
and it's just the price that we pay for decentralizing selection committees and decentralizing the process. It gives objectivity, but it removes some of the, shall we say, the more the nuanced selection of candidates, because you believe that they are strong.
I would say the only time that we're able to leverage some of the value of those, call it portfolio career, call it just extracurricular personal development that you've done, perhaps, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that kind of consultant interview, because at that point there's an opportunity to think, hold on a second, this guy or this girl or anyone can operate, but also could support the department by bringing the academia or the academic funding, could support the department because they have an interest in innovation, or they've done an MBA, could support us with applications for financial investments. So I think there may be an opportunity at that level, but I haven't seen it anywhere else where we've been able to sort of leverage that. And you end up sort of running almost two careers, because you're trying to train, and I think about myself, I'm trying to hit my targets and train and make sure that I'm not just safe, but I'm excelling as a trainee. But at the same time, I'm trying to develop and continue to develop this value, because I know that not only is it a personal aspiration and passion for myself, but I hope that at the end of that, the department or the trust, wherever I may end up, can also benefit from that. And it is a bit of a
it's added value.
It's added value, but I also agree about not taking that, not for lack of a better word, that sort of entitled approach and just assume that you're going to sit back and everything's going to be handed to you. As trainees, I've seen that firsthand in some, in some colleagues or sort of in other departments. And I think, we have to be proactive. We have to take self-directed. You want something, go get it. And I think that is an attitude and a culture we have to try and bring back into training. It's not just about filling ISCP, making sure all the training is provided to you at the end of the day.
It's the minimum.
That's the bare minimum.
I absolutely agree. I don't think it's all bleak though.
No, not at all.
It was brought to my attention that the executive board at Wolverhampton Hospital, the Royal Wolverhampton Hospital, new consultant appointments now have to give a short talk on their experience of an activity outside of their work, and really how that will impact and what they will bring as added value to their role. And it's about growing the consultant role. So I think, and I'm going to come to this in a moment, you need to look forward, not backwards. And it's about what the future holds, and the future actually will change. And I think, as I said earlier, the pendulum will swing. And added value will become very important in the future consultants, I believe. May I continue?
Please, we've interrupted you, but
no, it's good.
It's good.
So meeting personal expectations. So the variation in experience, that rotation around the region is really exciting, but it's also a challenge. And we see that we work with teams that we enjoy less, that we feel are less good and have less value, and ones that are better. But we must remember that that's not necessarily bad, that we learn from all our experiences. And I think actually it's a strength of our training scheme that we rotate, and we mustn't allow ourselves to just be judgmental about this place is great and this place is awful. Actually, you can sometimes learn more from the negatives than you do from the positives. This is really interesting. This is it's not interesting, is the wrong word. Interesting to me. The value of emergency training. It's completely dismissed in the training schemes. It's all service commitment. But actually, it's the time when the ST3, the more junior registrar, first makes decisions and takes responsibility, and it develops their decision-making skill. And with the right support, it's the time when we progress the fastest. And actually, to dismiss it from training, I think, is just a terrible error. I think it's actually a hugely valuable part of the training and should be promoted, not demoted, if that makes sense.
The confidence that generated in that is huge.
But it was clear from Nadine, it's when we grow up. I mean, even I can remember it. I mean, because I'm so old. Really.
You mean I can't remember it? Because
I think the third challenge that I would just highlight is enabling progression. I said nothing of the sort. Enabling progression. By that I mean is that really in an ideal training system, we would start with simple procedures, and week on week and month on month, we do more and more advanced procedures until at the end of the training scheme, we'd be doing the most advanced of procedures in the most complex settings. But actually, that is not a realizable dream in our current training structure within a functioning NHS. It cannot be achieved. We can aspire to it, that's different, but it cannot be achieved. And so I think it's very important as a trainee and as a trainer that we recognize that we have to work within a system, and we have to make the most of our learning experiences. And it's not going to just come as a railway down the track. It's just not going to be like that. And sometimes it is a little bit about meeting expectations. If we understand that our expectations are realistic, we can actually enjoy our training much more. If our expectations are unrealistic, we can't. So I just wanted to finish with a few points, and I did want to emphasize, I think what I've said so far is fairly uncontentious, and I think it's fairly, I think we actually, frighteningly, we all agree. But these are personal views now. And so what might my personal perspective on the priorities be? So I think I've already made this point that I think personal development and ownership of your training is a must. And in my mind, it's about building an added value for me as an individual, for me as a trainee, for me as a surgeon, that I can bring more to the table when I'm a consultant. The second thing is that we must not feel that a consultant appointment is the end. It's my aspiration. That's where I'm going. You will be a consultant for 30 years. It's a long time. And you need to have aspirations beyond that. And you need to be thinking now at ST3 level, what those aspirations might look like. And what I say to trainees is that you need to set a course, you need to have a belief in your direction, not because it's right, but because that's how you know when you've taken the wrong route. If you don't have a route, you don't know that you're going in the wrong direction. So think of your consultant appointment as the beginning and not the end. Carry a vision with you because that is your direction. And don't just focus on short-term targets. We all do, we all worry about today, we all worry about the patient in front of us. Of course we do, it would be wrong of us not to. But you have to stand back and you have to look on what is your long-term goal, where is your ship going, where are you headed, and are you moving down that direction? The third point is you need to prepare for the future. And I'm afraid any training scheme, any trainer, myself included, is fixed in the past. We only know the past and we're judging things on the past, but you are going to be the future. So you ST3s of tomorrow are the future leaders of surgery years after that. And so you must prepare for your future, not for my past. And I think it's very important that you recognize that what I think has gone before will not necessarily come round tomorrow. And I believe all of this is genuinely achievable within the system, but the system is not designed to drive this. The system is designed to tick the boxes and meet the minimum requirements. So beyond your clinical training, this is the added value. And it's not all about research by any means.
No,
I think
no.
surgeons need to be leaders. Management roles in surgery are incredibly important, and learning to build teams is, I think, a fundamental part of surgical training and surgical practice. I was actually wondering, Richard, if we ought to send all our trainees on those team building courses to build boats out of jerry cans, and you know, I do think it's so.
I think it'd be.
So service development sounds very dry, but there is no aspect of the NHS service that cannot be improved. It's a huge edifice with many cracks and flaws, and all of us can contribute to its improvement. And actually, it's a really exciting and satisfying part of one's job to know that you've actually improved the delivery of care within your department, your area, your clinical service. It's a fantastic thing to do, and something all consultants should be part of.
And it can be the smallest thing as well.
Oh,
it doesn't have to be some major change. It can be a tiny thing that makes a big difference.
And the reason that I'm here is teaching. And I think teaching is incredibly satisfying. There is nothing that gives more pleasure than passing on information and skills to trainees and people around you. And actually, teaching is an incredibly important part of what we do. And without it, we'd have no progression.
Yeah.
And I think Nadine has emphasised the opportunities for innovation, and they are fantastic. And I was going to finish with a few points on that, but I would just say that all of these points are achievable because of reduced hours and flexible training. And that actually is a huge opportunity that has not always been there. Yeah. Do I have a few minutes, Richard?
You have 2 minutes.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about the future of surgery, and this is a kind of heat map. And just for the trainees, I think it really paints a picture of what the future might look like. On the left of the diagram, as you see it, are really the features, the nanosurgery, the robotic surgery that are really about safer, less harmful surgery. And that is going to be a big focus of surgery over the next 5 to 10 years. The middle group of circles are really around improved imaging, and that will hugely influence about how we plan surgery and so how we carry it out. And all the decision making for surgery will be taken out of the surgical arena and put before the operation. And this, Richard, is going to have the biggest influence on training. This is where training is going to be.
Absolutely.
And then the third area where there is going to be transformation is in big data, genomics, patient information, and bioinformatics. And that is going to allow us to choose the right patients for the right operation. And at the moment, many patients do not necessarily get the best operation for them. And we're going to move into the world of personalised surgery.
Absolutely.
And I think that's a fantastic and exciting arena. I think that the collaboratives, the groups that have developed across the United Kingdom are a fantastic vehicle upon which to learn about this and to deliver it. I think that the Royal College of Surgeons have developed a network of trial centres and specialty leads that can coordinate research initiatives and innovation and introduce new surgical practice. And the Royal College of Surgeons has this list of current surgical specialty leads across the country whose role it is to support new surgical initiatives and innovation from trainees. So please feel you can get in touch with them. And finally, I think, Richard, just to say, the innovation, the inspiration, the developments in surgery, they're not just focused on the NHS. We actually can have an impact across the world. And the trainees running Global Surge have built the most incredible network that can transform surgical practice across the world. So I don't think there's ever been a greater opportunity to contribute to a greater future in surgery than there is now. And I think I would be delighted to be a trainee nowadays. Thank you.
So I think we all would agree that this is an extraordinary, exciting time, embarking on a career in surgery, with the potential for huge flexibility in that training, huge variation and diversity in the way that that career unfolds as time goes on. The research collaboratives that you mentioned there, I would absolutely encourage those listening into this webinar to get involved with those research collaboratives. They are fantastic and they're really inclusive.
Well, in your discipline, neurosurgery, there's been fantastic leadership in neurosurgery for the research collaboratives for the trainees.
Yeah.
And many of the emerging leaders in neurosurgery have come through that group. I was just thinking,
I mean, and more than that,
is the mentorship.
Yeah, but the work that's been done through those research collaboratives have taken frequently seen common problems and challenged the dogma around their treatment, and it's transforming how we manage those conditions. So it's absolutely fantastic, and it's done at the CT ST3 level, STR level. Definitely. So get involved is the message, absolutely. Now we've got a few questions here just in the last few minutes that we'll take in sequence order, if we may. I just need to, sorry. What is the future outlook for academic careers in surgery?
I'm not sure it's ever been brighter. There is a huge need for safe and effective introduction of novel techniques and innovation. And academic surgery has a fundamental role in ensuring that can be done. Not that it's all done by academic surgeons, but someone has to coordinate that and oversee it.
Yeah.
And I think that there is going to be a huge and burgeoning role. And the MRC have just created some new funded posts for NHS consultants to have funded research sessions to develop their research role. It's completely new innovation just started this year, so there are huge opportunities, I think, and it's very exciting.
So the message really is that you can enjoy an academic career from an academic perspective in terms of working for the university, but actually you can have a fantastic academic career through an ordinary NHS post, both at training level, and we've just talked about the research collaboratives from the juniors, but also beyond that. So there's many ways into this, and we talked earlier on about the ability to step on and step off an academic career structure, and I think therefore that people who are interested in this should really look at that very carefully, and it's about that flexibility of career as well. Nadine, have you got any particular point to make on that, or would you like to answer the next question, which I think is...
I'm happy to answer the next question.
Will surgeons become obsolete?
It's a very good question, and it's a question I get asked very regularly. Just coming with my kind of surgical innovation hat on. I think, on the contrary, I think what is great about these technologies is that if we can embrace them, they can augment surgeons. They can make surgeons more efficient, more informed, have more data accessible or crowdsourced at their hand to be able to deliver more personalized medicine for their patients. There are certain tasks in any surgeon's job that are perhaps repetitive or don't necessarily have to be done by the surgeon, that maybe even one could go as far as saying a robot could do a particular part of a procedure. But the question that we often get asked about this is, are robots going to replace surgeons? That's not going to happen, because robotic surgery really should be termed robotic enabled surgery. It's surgery that continues to happen, but enabled through robots and other devices to make it less invasive. So I think if anything, surgeons are going to become more efficient or have a bit more time to do things that are more complex, and the more simple things can be done by these adjuncts in whatever manner they may come, either human, robot, or other.
I think there's obviously a concern, particularly about robotics. There's a concern even about the use of AI and how that's going to impact. But I think a lot of people would say that the value of these technologies is hopefully it will allow more clinical time for us to spend with patients. So actually the added value here is that it frees up time that we would otherwise have been doing other things, and you can spend it with patients. So yeah, I share your view. I don't think we're going to become obsolete at all. So here's another question, Nadine, that would go, how to balance theatre time, just moving on, how to balance theatre time with seeing ward patients?
That's a good question. I mean, I think as surgeons, we are multitaskers in our nature. We do our ward rounds daily, we see our patients clinic, and we manage to get to theatre as well. If this question is being asked more from a kind of core trainee level, I remember that time when I was that core trainee trying to get through my ward job to try and then make time to get to theatre. I think this goes back to a lot of those translatable skills that we will have to bring into our practice around project management and time management. There are ways around it. I mean, it's not always perfect. Of course, we would always say we'd love to be in theatre more often, but I think there is an opportunity, if you are efficient or manage your time, to sort of come in and do a really early ward round, get some of the urgent jobs done, or buddy up with another colleague. I did that a few times in some of my jobs, where me and another SHO would buddy up. One person would take all the ward jobs one day while the other one went to theatre, and vice versa. So I think you can be creative, and there is a bit of flexibility in letting you almost run it to some extent the way you'd like, to say, why don't we work together? Will you do the jobs today? I'll go to theatre, or I'm going to come in really early, get all the bloods and things done, and actually make it to theatre, or make it for the afternoon. So there are ways around it, and I had a great, surgical training early on. I had exposure to many things, and I was in very, very busy jobs in busy hospitals. So I think there are ways around it, but you have to try and work as a team. I
think there's two key elements to that. One is learning to prioritize, and it is about identifying what has to be done now, what can be delayed, and also what I was saying about identifying your own goals. What are you trying to get out of this? It's not all about operating. It's actually about learning to be a surgeon. And that means you have to learn how to look after patients.
Yeah.
So, and I think it's teamwork, as you say, buddying up with other teams. So you should be working as a team. You have to work across a team. Sometimes you have to cover, but other times you can get away and do other things.
And this is a perfect opportunity to actually begin to develop those skills.
I would also say that the opportunity that's often undervalued is actually clinic time, because most, and myself included, I fell into that job where you think you just really want to go to theatre because as a surgical trainee I should be in theatre, but actually being in clinic with surgeons and understanding decision making is extremely valuable and often undervalued at that early stage, because we're just thinking about being in theatre. So I would urge you to sort of look at other training opportunities along that too.
So just before we finish, and we're getting very close now, another question which has been asked a couple of times is the opportunity for surgeons to work internationally, either as part of their training or indeed part of their later career. What would your thoughts be on that? 30 seconds each.
I mean, I personally got involved in overseas, but more from a global health point of view. So for 10 years, every year I went to different countries with charities, supported by consultants, and got involved in international surgery that way, in a safe and obviously ethical and protected way. I think that is one way of getting involved.
So I think I'm delighted to say the NHS and the Department of Health are now funding global surgery projects. and global surgery is seen as one of the most important health issues facing the world today. So the opportunities for trainee surgeons to be involved in global surgical problems and their solutions never been better.
Fantastic. So it's exactly 7 o'clock. We've had our 60 minutes, so I'm just going to try and draw this to an end, if I may. First of all, I want to thank Nadine and Dion for your thoughtful contribution to this. It's been most enjoyable. I want to draw people's attention to some future webinars, and you can see there's going to be one on each month, and there's the next few topics, which are on social media and the surgical profession in September, issues around getting published, and therefore how you can achieve that in October, and then looking at job planning in November. There will be webinars happening 10 months of the year, so we won't have them in December or in August, but apart from that, there will be webinars every month. And we really encourage you to not only join in with these webinars, but give us feedback through the college so we can improve these for you and make them more valuable for you. There's some events which you may find interesting as well coming up in September. Surgeons at the Sharp End, and that's looking at knife crime in the West Midlands. Women in surgery, really important topic, which again is in September. And then in Oxford in October, there's a conference looking at how we change perceptive, our thoughts really about moving from illness to wellness. And obviously what we want is for patients to be well. I would like to just close with a few thoughts about what we've been talking about today. And what I want to leave you with is what I hope is how inspiring, how diverse, how exciting a career in surgery can be. We've heard about some very positive training opportunities, how it's important to develop your own careers as you go through, and how there are opportunities for diversity within that training. The college, as you know, is here to try to provide not only information but support for you in that process. And Nadine talked about some of the publications from the college in terms of publications on mentoring, publications on bullying, and other really important topics. So I would encourage you to just go to the college website and you'll be able to get access to all and any of those publications that are there. Once again, thank you so much for taking the trouble to be with the time to be with us this evening. We've really enjoyed this, and we look forward to listening in to the next webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you.